As you may already know, modern Hebrew is the result of a language revival because Hebrew had ceased to be spoken as a native language of daily life for around 1600 years. So Hebrew linguists created a new standardized form of the language that was expanded for modern life, and now millions of people speak it as a native language. It sounds like it was successfully revived, right? But I see a lot of comments online these days saying that modern Hebrew is completely different from ancient biblical Hebrew. Is that true? No, it's not totally different, but it's not exactly the same as biblical Hebrew either. It wasn't based only on biblical Hebrew. It was based on the entire extensive body of literary Hebrew and Jewish traditions of liturgical Hebrew that were continuously used throughout the centuries, up until the time modern Hebrew was created. Considering how much time has passed, modern Hebrew really isn't that different from biblical Hebrew. And of course, that's partly because it was based on historical literary forms of the language. The goal of modern Hebrew was to revive Hebrew as a native spoken language for a new Jewish society in the Holy Land, the goal of Zionism. So modern Hebrew was sort of compiled by adopting features from the various eras and styles of literary Hebrew, while its vocabulary was greatly expanded. So today we're going to compare biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew and see just how similar and how different they are. Originally, Hebrew was written in a different script, the Paleo-Hebrew script, the version of the Canaanite script used by the Israelites, and it was almost identical to the Phoenician script. The early books of the Bible, like Genesis and Exodus, among others, were originally written in that Paleo-Hebrew script that's no longer used. But after the exile to Babylon, Hebrew adopted the Aramaic square script, which the later books of the Bible were written in. And that script has been used to write Hebrew ever since, including modern Hebrew. If you compare modern Hebrew text to Paleo-Hebrew text, obviously it looks nothing like it. But if you look at pretty much any Hebrew text written after the 5th century BCE, the script is the same. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, are written in the same script as modern Hebrew, except for a few fragments that are written in Paleo-Hebrew. Syntax. The general syntax of biblical Hebrew was a little bit different from modern Hebrew, and its literary style was quite different. For the moment, I'm going to pronounce the biblical Hebrew examples using modern Hebrew pronunciation, so I can focus on one thing at a time, and I'll come back to the pronunciation in a couple of minutes. Biblical Hebrew tended to be VSO, verb subject object, while modern Hebrew is normally SVO, subject verb object. Take this part of the opening verse of Genesis. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. God created the heavens and the earth. Word for word it's created, God, direct object marker, the heavens, and direct object marker, the earth. In everyday modern Hebrew, the word order would probably be Elohim bara et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, with God first and created second. Of course, biblical sentences are almost never translated into modern Hebrew though. People read them as they are. Here's another example from Genesis 2:24. Ya'azav ish et aviv ve'et imo. This means, a man shall leave his father and his mother. Word for word it's shall leave, man, direct object marker, his father, and direct object marker, his mother. The verb comes first and the subject comes second. In everyday modern Hebrew, the word order would be ish ya'azov et aviv ve'et imo, again with the subject first and the verb second. Also note that biblical Hebrew had a slightly different verb form here, ya'azav, with an a vowel rather than an o vowel, because it's a special form used before a pause. Modern Hebrew doesn't have this, so it uses the usual form ya'azov. And that's an example of my next point. While these biblical sentences are perfectly understandable to modern Hebrew speakers, there are other things about them aside from basic word order that stand out as very literary or formal to modern Hebrew speakers. We'll look at those things in just a minute, but first I want to give a quick shout out to my LangFocus supporters on Patreon and channel members right here on YouTube. By joining my Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube, you can gain access to exclusive videos like this one about Yiddish loanwords in modern Hebrew, this one on Sabir, the Mediterranean lingua franca, and more. So you get to see special members videos while also supporting this channel so I can keep it going for everyone. Head over to my Patreon or click the join button on my YouTube channel page to become one of the Lang folk. Now let's get back to those things that modern Hebrew speakers might find highly literary or formal. Like in this sentence, haaretz refers to the earth or land in general, the terrestrial sphere, but in modern Hebrew, eretz generally refers to a specific land or country, and haaretz, meaning the land, is widely used to refer to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Noladati ba'aretz means I was born in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. And in this sentence, aviv and imo sound very formal or literary in modern Hebrew. In daily conversation, the words for father and mother are abba and ima, which were borrowed from Aramaic, and don't appear in the Hebrew Bible, but do appear in the Mishnah, so they were ancient borrowings. Also, rather than using possessive pronoun suffixes like this, In modern Hebrew, it's more common to use the preposition shel with a suffixed pronoun, Abba shelo, Ima shelo. Again, shel is something that doesn't appear in most of the Bible, but it's widely used in the Mishnah. Except in a couple of later parts of the Bible, the biblical equivalent of shel was ashel, literally which is to, or which is for. So there were phrases like hakesef asherli, my money. In modern Hebrew it's hakesef sheli, and that started with Mishnaic Hebrew. Asherle contracted to shel, which further contracted to shel, which gradually replaced asherle by the time of the Mishnah. And asher by itself, meaning which or that, was replaced by she. Shel is probably one of the most common and useful words in modern Hebrew, a possessive preposition which on its own you can translate as of. Maybe you're starting to see that modern Hebrew has a lot of influence from Mishnaic Hebrew. Also, while the word ish does mean man in modern Hebrew, it's used in more specific ways, like in phrases like ish asakim, man of business, or businessman, or ish gadol, a great man. But in more general daily use, the word gever is widely used instead. In biblical Hebrew, gever was more like a man of full strength, emphasizing his role as the protector of women and children. So that whole sentence in everyday modern Hebrew might be gever ya'azov et abba va'ima shelo, or maybe gever ya'azov et ha'orim shelo, a man shall leave his parents. And instead of shelo, it could have the possessive pronoun suffix, horav. These possessive suffix forms are still used in modern Hebrew, but they're generally more formal. Okay, there's one more possible change that you might make to this sentence depending on the intended meaning in English, but that won't make sense until after I've explained something in the verb section later, so I'll come back to it in a few minutes. Pronunciation. Like I mentioned earlier, so far I've been using modern Hebrew pronunciation, or simplified Sephardic pronunciation as it's sometimes called, but modern Hebrew pronunciation is a little different from biblical Hebrew pronunciation. We don't know exactly how Hebrew was pronounced in the time of the Bible, we only have reconstructions. The current pronunciation markings written in all Hebrew Bibles were created between around 750 and 950 CE by the Masoretes, scholars based in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. Their pronunciation system doesn't exactly match reconstructions of biblical Hebrew, but it doesn't seem that different either, especially from late biblical Hebrew. Other pronunciation styles developed in various communities of the Jewish diaspora: Ashkenazi pronunciation, Sephardic, Yemenite, and others. They read the same Tiberian text, but pronounced some sounds differently. The pronunciation of modern Hebrew was based on the Sephardic style, but during the revival it was also influenced by the other pronunciation traditions of its new speakers. Basically, two modern Hebrew accents emerged, an accent influenced by Ashkenazi Jews who spoke Yiddish and Slavic languages, and an accent influenced by Mizrahi Jews who spoke Arabic dialects. The first accent is now the dominant one. So let's get back to some of the biblical Hebrew sentences I read before, and I'll do my best to read them in both modern Hebrew pronunciation and in Tiberian pronunciation, even though I'm not an expert. Ya'azav ish et aviv ve'et imo. Ya'azov ish es aviv ve'es imo. First, this word had a sound in biblical Hebrew that isn't used in the dominant modern Hebrew accent, ein. In modern Hebrew, it's a glottal stop or silent. It is used in the Mizrahi accent, though, the accent used by many Jewish immigrants from Arab countries. More in the past than now. So in the Tiberian accent of biblical Hebrew, it's Ya'azov, and in the Mizrahi accent, it's Ya'azav, and in the dominant accent, it's Ya'azav. Also notice that Aleph, which represents a glottal stop, is often silent in modern Hebrew, but clearly pronounced in biblical Hebrew. Ya'azavish, Ya'azov ish, et imo, et imo. Also, this direct object marker is pronounced et in modern Hebrew, but es in biblical Hebrew. That's because in biblical Hebrew, the consonant tav had two allophones, t and th, while in modern Hebrew it's always t. Also, in modern Hebrew, the distinction between long and short vowels is mostly gone. But in biblical Hebrew, at least in the Tiberian system, vowel length, while not phonemic, was important to pronounce. So here we have aviv, with a long a vowel and a long e vowel. But in modern Hebrew, it would be aviv. Here we have imo. In modern Hebrew, it would be imo. Also, the doubling of letters like this is not done in modern Hebrew, so it's not imo, it's just imo. You might also notice that some vowels are a little different. This vowel, called a kametz, is pronounced a in biblical Hebrew, at least in Tiberian pronunciation, while it's a in modern Hebrew. That's why you heard Ya'azov versus Ya'azav. Another sentence. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So again, you can hear the difference in the kametz vowel. Bara versus bara. And the resh sound, the R sound, is a little different. In Tiberian Hebrew, it was generally pronounced like a voiced velar trill, r, and sometimes like the alveolar trill you hear in Spanish, which I can't say. but it's also pharyngealized like an emphatic consonant. In modern Hebrew, it's a voiced velar fricative or approximate rather than a trill. Ra, bara, bara. In Elohim, you can hear the longer vowel in im in biblical Hebrew. Elohim, Elohim, or Elohim. And again, we see et versus eth. In the next word, the biblical word has a doubled consonant after the definite article ha. Hashamayim versus modern Hebrew hashamayim. And there's the kametz again with its more closed aw vowel. And before that, there's the consonant he in the definite article. Native speakers of modern Hebrew these days seem to make the he sound silent or very subtle in everyday speech. So hashamayim ends up being like ashamayim, and et hashamayim ends up sounding like tashamayim. In the final word, aretz, aretz, we encounter the voiced uvular trill again in biblical Hebrew, and the fricative in modern Hebrew. And the final consonant, tzadi, is pronounced in biblical Hebrew like an emphatic S, meaning that it's pharyngealized. So, in modern Hebrew, it's pronounced ts. I find it hard to say the emphatic S at the end of a word, but I think it's something like this. Aretz, aretz. Okay, so one more time. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay, as an overall impression, how different would you say that is? To me, the difference sounds like an immigrant to Canada who speaks English with a very noticeable accent, but I can understand what they say. Vocabulary. Of course, one of the big differences between biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew is in vocabulary. Most of the core vocabulary of biblical Hebrew is still used in modern Hebrew. House, bayith, bayit. Bread, lechem, lechem. To go, halach, halach. To say, amar, amar. Good, tov, tov. Large, gadol, gadol. But some biblical Hebrew words are not used in modern Hebrew. Pima. This word, which appears only in Job chapter 15 verse 27, is kind of unclear, but seems to mean something like bulges of fat. This isn't used in modern Hebrew. Blima. This word only appears in Job chapter 26 verse 7, and seems to mean nothingness, literally without what, or without anything. This isn't used in modern Hebrew. About 1,500 of the 8,000 or so Hebrew words found in the Bible only appear once, and most of those were left out of modern Hebrew because they were never common to begin with. Sometimes we're not even sure what they mean. Like in Isaiah chapter 14 verse 4, there's the word mazhevah, which was traditionally translated as golden city, referring to Babylon, because it appears to have the Aramaic root meaning gold, dalet he bet. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the word is written marhevah, with the letter resh, not dalet. They look similar and can be easily mistaken with each other. In this form, the word seems to have the root resh he bet, which can mean arrogance or fury. So in some Bible versions, it's translated as fury, and I saw it in one translation as the haughty one, haughty meaning arrogant. Since this word requires debate and interpretation, it probably wouldn't have been useful in modern Hebrew. In my personal experience studying biblical Hebrew, this is one of the hardest and most frustrating things. Seeing words like this that you'll probably never see again, but that you have to dedicate lots of your time to figuring out because their meaning is unclear. But there's one such word that appears in the Bible just once, but is frequently used in modern Hebrew. The word for cheese, gvino. In modern Hebrew, gvina. There are many words from biblical Hebrew that are used in modern Hebrew but have taken on new meanings, new expanded meanings that contain the essence of the original meaning. In the Bible, the personal pronoun for I is anochi, or ani. Modern Hebrew uses ani for I, but anochi has been repurposed as an adjective meaning selfish. In biblical Hebrew, the verb nahag meant to lead or to drive forward, as in leading people, animals, or a chariot. But in modern Hebrew, nahag means to drive an automobile. And you might have noticed a difference in the G or gimel sound at the end. Nahag, nahag. In biblical Hebrew, the letter gimel is another letter that has two allophones, g or r, a fricativized version of g. But in modern Hebrew, gimel is always pronounced g. Rechev. In the Bible, this refers to a chariot fleet, but in modern Hebrew, rechev is the word for vehicle. For automobiles specifically, there's also the word mechonit, but people often say rechev instead. Ahuz. In biblical Hebrew, this meant a portion, like one piece of a larger whole. In modern Hebrew, ahuz specifically means percent, a specific portion of 1/100th. Originally, it was part of a phrase, ahuz lemea, a portion of 100, but then people just started saying ahuz. One well-known example is the word hashmal, which is the modern Hebrew word for electricity. The word hashmal appears in the Bible 3 times, all in the visions of Ezekiel, and referred to a brilliant glowing substance. English Bibles typically translate it as amber or glowing metal. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible from the 3rd century BCE, hashmal is translated as elektron, which could refer to either amber or electrum, an alloy of silver and gold. If you rub amber, it creates static electricity that attracts light objects. In the 17th century, the Latin word electricus was coined from the Greek word and meant like amber to describe this phenomenon. The English words electric and electricity came from the Latin word electricus, which came from the Greek word elektron. In modern Hebrew, the biblical Hebrew equivalent of elektron, hashmal, was chosen to mean electricity because of amber's static charge and also because of the image of brilliant light in Ezekiel's visions. In the dominant modern Hebrew accent, it's now pronounced chashmal rather than hashmal, but in the Mizrahi accent, it has the h sound like in biblical Hebrew, hashmal. But then what's the word for amber in modern Hebrew? It's imbar. This word entered Hebrew in medieval translations of Arabic writings as a transliteration of ambar, and that word traces back further to Middle Persian. In medieval times, a lot of Arabic words were borrowed into Hebrew, or they inspired the coinage of similar words in Hebrew, while translating Arabic writings on science, philosophy, and logic. This was a pre-modern expansion of Hebrew vocabulary. Something similar happened in the 19th century with modern Hebrew. Hebrew linguists mostly based new words on older Hebrew words and their roots, expanding existing word families. Like for the word rechev, meaning chariot, and now vehicle, they added rakevet, meaning train, rakevel, meaning cable car, rachban, which means rover, like a Mars rover, and rakevet harim, which means roller coaster, literally mountain train. But they sometimes looked at modern Arabic words for ideas and coined similar words using the equivalent roots and word forms in Hebrew. One example is the word meaning official, rishmi. This was inspired by the Arabic word rasmi. There was an existing Hebrew root, r-sh-m, which meant to write down or record, and the Arabic word rasmi is based on the equivalent root in Arabic, r-s-m. So Hebrew linguists used the Hebrew root to create a similar adjective. That kind of root and morphological matching, along with a semantic borrowing, is the main way that Arabic influenced modern Hebrew's standard vocabulary, rather than direct loanwords. Modern Hebrew's slang, though, contains a lot of direct Arabic borrowings. For example, if you say that this is an akhla sirton, an awesome video, akhla is an example of a direct Arabic borrowing. Some of those borrowings come from interaction with Palestinian Arabs, and others come from the mass immigration of Jews from Arabic countries in the 1950s. These are the Mizrahim that I mentioned before. Verbs. There were also some differences in the way verbs worked in Biblical Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew often made use of a verb form called the vav consecutive that reversed its tense, or aspect to be more precise. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 5. This means, and you shall love the Lord with all your heart. Word for word it's, and you shall love, direct object marker, the Lord, God, your, with all heart, your. But this verb form, ohavta, is actually the perfect form, which shows a completed action, typically in the past. But this part here, v, which means and, changes this from perfect to imperfect, which indicates an action that has not been completed yet, typically non-past, so present or future. The normal biblical Hebrew imperfect form is tehav, meaning you love, or you shall love. The modern Hebrew form is slightly different, tohav. Most verb forms in modern Hebrew are identical to the biblical ones, but a handful are different like this. So in theory, in modern Hebrew this sentence would start with Vetohav et Adonai, with no vav consecutive. Of course, this sentence is almost never translated into modern Hebrew, because it's very commonly known and people understand it correctly even with the vav consecutive. As a quick side note, again we see nouns with suffixed prepositions showing possession. Elohecha, your God, and levavcha, your heart. In everyday modern Hebrew, these tend to use the shel form, ha-Elohim shelcha, and the word levav is very literary. In modern Hebrew, the word lev is usually used instead, though both levav and lev come from biblical Hebrew. So in modern Hebrew, it would be bechol libcha, or bechol alev shelcha. Okay, another example of the vav consecutive. This one's from Genesis chapter 1 verse 5. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom. And God called the light day. Word for word it's, and he called God to the light day. Yikra is the imperfect form, typically with non-past meaning. But again, the vav at the beginning makes it perfect, focusing on a completed action in the past. In modern Hebrew this would be, Ve'Elohim kara lo yom. And God, he called to the light day. The subject comes first, so it's SVO, and kara is the past tense form, equivalent to biblical Hebrew perfect aspect. In modern Hebrew, yikra means he will call, or he will read. This verb has both meanings, because reading was originally associated with recitation, with reading out loud. The vav in the vav consecutive literally just means and, but to me it seems to cover the uses of and, so, then, and sometimes but. So he woke up in the morning and he said, "I hope it's sunny today." Then he opened the curtains and it was sunny. So he smiled. But then he saw a dark cloud coming closer and his smile faded. In biblical Hebrew, that might be a series of vav consecutive forms. And the way the verb reverses from perfect to imperfect kind of reminds me of the narrative present in English. So the other day I'm walking down the street and I see this guy, and he waves to me, but I don't know who he is. Then he walks up to me, but his smile fades, and he's like, "Never mind." And I'm like, "What?" So I asked him what was up, and it turns out he thought I was Roger Federer until he got up close. True story, by the way. In that story, I was talking about the past, but the way I used the present tense made it feel more like it was happening as you were hearing it. That's not exactly the same as the vav consecutive, but it's an example of how changing tenses can serve a narrative purpose. There's another important difference between biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew verbs that you might not notice until you read something that seems confusing. Modern Hebrew has explicit tenses, past tense, present tense, and future tense. But biblical Hebrew verbs didn't have tense, they had aspect, like I mentioned before. The perfective form was the same in form as the modern Hebrew past tense, but rather than past time, it indicated completion. But completion can sometimes be in the future. For example, in this sentence from Isaiah chapter 5, verse 13. Therefore my people will go into exile. Word for word it's, therefore will go into exile people my. Gala, or gala, is the third person singular masculine perfect form of the verb meaning to go into exile. So normally it would mean it went into exile, or he went into exile. But here it's part of a prophecy of things that will occur in the future. In modern Hebrew this could be lachen ami yigle, yigle meaning he or it will go into exile. In modern Hebrew, gala would have to mean he or it went into exile. And take this sentence from Job chapter 1 verse 5. Thus Job would do all the days. Or in more colloquial English, this is what Job would always do. Word for word it's, thus would do Job all the days. The verb form here, ya'aseh, is the imperfect form which indicates incompleted action, which is typically non-past. But in some cases like this, it shows ongoing or habitual action in the past. So it can mean he does or he will do, but sometimes also he was doing or he would do habitually. But in modern Hebrew, the imperfect form is precisely the future tense, he will do. Also, the present tense forms of modern Hebrew weren't really present tense in biblical Hebrew. They were participle forms. For example, yoshev could be a noun meaning one who dwells or sits, in other words an inhabitant, or an adjective meaning dwelling. For example, Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. Word for word it's, and Jacob, a man, mild, dwelling, tents. This is a verbless sentence with yoshev as an adjective describing Jacob. It could also indicate that an action was ongoing, like V'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel, and he was sitting at the entrance of the tent. Word for word, and he sitting, entrance, the tent. It seems like it has tense, but the tense actually depends on the context created by other verbs in this sentence. So a participle like yoshev can also describe what someone's doing at a future point in time. In modern Hebrew, these forms are still used as adjectives and nouns like the biblical participles, but also serve as the explicit present tense. Ani yoshev, I sit or I dwell, ata yoshev, you sit or dwell, etc. This particular form is the masculine singular present tense. A few minutes ago, I said that there was another possible difference in this sentence. Ya'azov ish es la'aviv es immo versus gever ya'azov et abba ve'ima shelo, or gever ya'azov et orav. Because in some Bible versions, they translate this as the general present tense. A man leaves his father and his mother, rather than shall leave. In biblical Hebrew, the general present was expressed with the imperfect form, like ya'azov. But in modern Hebrew, it's expressed with the present tense, the participle form. Gever ozev et abba ve'ima shelo, or gever ozev et orav. People often assume that change from an aspectual verb system to a tense-based verb system took place during the revival of modern Hebrew under the influence of European languages. But that change, that shift towards a tense-based system, was already taking place in Mishnaic Hebrew. After that point, prose was generally tense-based, while poetry was often written in a more biblical style, using verb aspect as well as the vav consecutive. It's hard to give a comprehensive comparison of biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew in this little video, but hopefully that gave you a little bit of an idea of how they're connected and similar, but also how they're different. When people say they're the same language, it's not like British English versus American English. I think it's more like Shakespearean English versus modern American English. I think it's comparable when you consider the different pronunciation, the sometimes different grammar, the different words, and the same words that have different shades of meaning. But in many cases, I think it's actually easier for modern Hebrew speakers to read Biblical Hebrew than it is for me to read Shakespeare. Because Hebrew ceased to be a spoken native language for a long time and was primarily used in writing, it essentially became frozen in time to a certain extent. Not completely, because it did evolve over time, but not nearly as much as languages that were everyday vernaculars with native speakers. Old English was in use just 1200 years ago, but it's far more different from modern English than Biblical Hebrew is from modern Hebrew, even though Biblical Hebrew was in use 2100 to 3500 years ago. And modern Hebrew is even more similar to Mishnaic Hebrew, which was written around 1800 years ago. Hey buddy, I'll be there in, yeah, I'm here, but I'll be there in 1 minute. I'm gonna finish one little part. Hey, oh, it's not, oh, it is recording, but I'm not gonna put that on the screen. I'm not gonna put that in the video. No way. Modern Hebrew was standardized with a selection of Hebrew influences: core vocabulary from Biblical Hebrew, additional vocabulary from Medieval Hebrew and later, syntax from Mishnaic Hebrew, and morphology from Hebrew in general, because it was quite consistent. So it ends up being not so different from the Hebrew of the past. If it had been continuously spoken as a native language since ancient times, it would have ended up being much more different. The question of the day: how similar do Biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew seem to you? Are they more similar than your language is to its ancient form from a couple thousand years ago? And to native speakers of modern Hebrew, how easily can you read Biblical Hebrew? Once again, I'd like to say thanks to all of the Langfocus Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members for making this video possible. Without your support, I honestly wouldn't be able to keep this channel going, so a very special thanks goes out to you. If you'd like to support my work and gain access to exclusive videos at the same time, then you can become a channel member too, or come over to Patreon and join me there. If you enjoyed this video, then I'm sure you'll like this one too. Click the thumbnail to check it out.